Hi, wonderful people. I'm Leah Rapaner. As a sociologist, University of Melbourne professor, founder of the Gender Equity Initiative, director of the Future of Work Lab, woman, wife, and mother, I've made it my life's mission to take down every ridiculous gender myth out there. Together, we'll deep dive into the research to get to the bottom of all these misperceptions that are holding all of us back. Don't worry, I've studied these types of questions for decades, and after publishing countless articles exactly on these topics, I know when they are nonsense or real truths. And I'm going to help you learn that too. So here we go. Let's do it. This is Misperceived. Hi, everyone. On today's episode, we're going to unpack this question: do mothers who have babies later in life live longer? This was something that has been circulating around on Instagram, on TikTok, and you all actually sent it to us and asked, is this actually good research? What should we make from it? Now, I know for many of you, you're thinking about the timing of fertility. It's a highly, highly personal question. When I think about when I had my first daughter, I was 29. It was an unexpected but very welcomed pregnancy, but definitely not planned. And yes, she does know this. And I was panicked. We were married. I had a mortgage. I was almost in my 30s. And yet this pregnancy was not one that we had intended to have at that moment in time. She just was excited to come into our lives and our world. And I remember talking to one of my best friends about being, just scared about it because I didn't know I was about to become a mother and so quickly. And I could see the pain in her eyes because she was trying to have a baby. And I had been gifted this thing without asking that she had been asking for so long. And so as we talk about this, I just want to acknowledge that these decisions are not simple, that they are highly emotional, that you may be on your own pregnancy or fertility journey, and that is yours and yours alone. And sometimes these pieces of research can feel validating and sometimes they can feel kind of dismissive. So I just want to walk you through this and help reassure you that this is a very complicated and personal question. And here we are to talk about one specific article to help you understand what it says. On today's episode, I'm going to talk to you about this study that's titled Extended Maternal Age at Birth of Last Child in Women's Longevity and Long Life Family Study. Did you get that? It's from Fang Hui Sun, Paolo Sebastiani, Nicole Schumpf, Harold Bay, Stacey Anderson, Avery McIntosh, Haley Abel, Irma Ello, and Thomas Pearls. Now, when we publish in, the more public health, there's groups of teams that are researchers, and that's why there's so many articles on this. And what they do is they take this study, and it's called the Long Life Family Study. It's this longitudinal study, and it's a genetic study. And they're bringing together over 500 family members, families and their family members. And they picked these people because they have what they term exceptional longevity. So this is a sample of people that just happen to have lived longer. They have long life. And they're using this sample to try to understand what is the relationship between having a baby a little bit later and living longer. So I want you, as you're hearing this circulate around Instagram and TikTok, that it's a very specific sample of people who actually are selected into it because they are living longer. They're taking about 5,000 people overall. They're taking 551 of those who are living in the US. And why they have so many people is because they're like taking the mom and the kids, right? So it's 551 families, but then they're taking the family members within the family. So imagine it's like me plus my husband plus my daughter, maybe, right? They're going across. And what they were doing was they were basically looking at those who were at the extreme ages. Now, the reason I'm telling you this, because if you're hearing this article circle around, you're thinking it's about you at your age. I hate to tell you, but it's not. They're looking at those who had at least one child, and that they lived beyond the 5th percentile of survival, right? What that means is they're living into old age, and they're comparing those who didn't live into old age, but they're also looking at those who are 70 years of age or older. Now, if you're like, wait, what? Let me break this down for you. They're taking the mother who basically lived the mother of this. So they're looking at, say, your grandmother or your mother and seeing if they had a baby later on do they live longer? This makes sense because if you are now at your current age having a baby at 30, 35, 40, 45, we can't predict whether you are going to live longer, right? You have to enter through your life course. Like, we can't predict whether you're going to live into old age because you're too young. So what they're doing is taking your parents or your grandparents and looking at a sample of them and looking at if they had babies later on, do they continue to live longer? What they were interested in doing is looking at, they did control for things. So one of the things you should be thinking when you hear this research is you should be thinking things like, okay, well, but what about, more educated people? What about if they ever smoked? What about their sociodemographic characteristics? Were they richer families? Were they poorer families? And they do control for some of these things. So they're controlling for level of education. They're controlling for whether they smoked, whether they used it or they ever used it. And they are looking at, people had 1 to 2 versus 3 children. So they're looking at these differences. But again, we should just be thinking about all of these other factors that may not be included in that and how that might influence the results. So what do they find? Well, yes, they find that mothers who have babies later on are more likely to have exceptional longevity. And they found that this was particularly true if they went from 0 to 1 children or 1 to 2. But if they went from 3, if they had 3 or more children later on, then it wasn't really that evident that that was what was going on, right? So it's really about, did you have a first baby or a second baby later in life? And what I want you to think about is later in life is having their last child 33 to 37. Okay, so you have to think again, this is your mothers or your grandmothers, depending on where you are in the age cohort, right? Anyone who is, say, in their 70s or more now. And so if they had a baby when they were 33 to 37, right, that's older for that cohort. Now, many of us are having babies into our 40s. This is kind of the age of first birth or the age of second birth is shifting a lot. But basically what they find is that anyone who had their last child at the age of 33 plus were more likely to be living into that last percentile. If you had your last baby when you were 29 or younger, then you didn't see that return to age. So you didn't actually necessarily, these women didn't live longer. But what I want you to understand too is one of the things that they found that was quite predictive. So even though they find, yes, okay, so like let's take a step back. The research shows that amongst those who are living longer, for a generation of women who is 70 plus now, that if they had their last child at a later age, they are more likely to live longer. What they also found was one of the biggest predictors of whether that group of women was likely to live long was whether they had a family history of living long, whether your genetics are actually such that you have longevity in your DNA. And so when they weigh it up, yes, there is this effect for having a baby at a later age. And yes, this group of women does live longer. But the most important predictor in this is actually whether you have exceptional longevity in your lineage. So where do we go from here? Is it in fact a misperception that having a baby later on means you will live longer? Yes and no, right? Like, I don't think you should say, oh my God, we should totally throw away this research, right? Like, we shouldn't say there's no effect of that. But I also want you to think that this is not as simple as it's being presented when you read it or you consume it in your social media. It's actually for a very specific cohort of people. They've made it into older age. They're talking about your parents, your grandparents. They're not talking about you. And what I'm saying to you is they're not necessarily identifying a causal story. It could be that healthier people just have babies later. So it could be that the people who are able to have babies later on into life actually are less likely to have other health conditions. And that's the reason why they live longer. But what they don't tell us is the ways in which class might structure our ability to live longer. We know that this is true. We've done a previous podcast on that. The fact that health is socially patterned, that our access to high quality healthcare, our access to clean air and clean water varies based on your geography, and that isn't necessarily included in this. So how do we understand these other things about what actually leads people to live long and healthy lives? And how do we understand it as both genetics, environment, and then maybe these decisions about life decisions? Right? Like when you have a baby or not. And again, the biggest predictor in this is whether these people actually have a family history of living longer. So when they have their babies is one piece, but it's not the whole piece. So what should you take from this? If you're a woman who had a baby at a later age, should you panic? Absolutely not. There is a range of evidence showing that actually parents who have babies later in age have more money, right? You're further along in your career. They have more financial security. They spend more time in the developmental or affective time with their children, right? They're engaged in these more engrossing activities with their kids, in part because they're slightly older. They have more patience. They're more invested. There's a range of benefits of having a baby at a later age, even if it doesn't mean you're going to make it to 100. Now, if you're a woman who had a baby earlier in life, should you panic? Absolutely not. If you didn't have a baby at 35 or 33, is it doomed? No. There's evidence that people who have babies at younger ages have a range of positive outcomes. They have a greater sense of meaning and purpose. They have greater support from parents and partners. They engage in a loving relationship with their children or their child. And the idea that when you wait till you're older, you might have more medical complications. So if you have a baby slightly younger, you're trading that for more money, right? These are all trades. There is no perfect time to have a baby. I talk to women a lot about, from the research, what's the perfect time to have a baby? Never, right? Like actually probably never. So this idea that 20s are perfect or your 30s are perfect or your 40s are perfect, there's no perfect time. It's trade-offs between each. And so we would do ourselves a service of just taking some of the pressure off in terms of optimization. I'm going to optimize the ideal time to have my baby and everything will be perfect. Take some of that pressure off and acknowledge that the research shows like, hey, there's some pluses of having it here. There's some minuses of having it here. And you got to make the best decision for yourself, for your life, for your stage, and for what you need and want at that moment in time. I hope that this is making you a little less anxious. I hope this is letting you step into your journey, whatever it is, whether you want to have babies or not, early or not, later or not, with some ease, some light, and some fun. Just something to note is that we are so lucky and grateful that this series is being supported by the Melbourne Public Humanities Initiative at the University of Melbourne. Thank you for listening to us. Thanks to all your likes, your subscribes, your follows. We are getting some money to support this. Thank you, the Melbourne Public Humanities Initiative. We are so eternally grateful. If you like this episode, if you have comments about this episode, if you hate this episode, tell us. Give us some comments on our Misperceived podcast or at Prof. Leah on Instagram. And also, thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week. Mwah. As per always, thank you for spending time with me on Misperceived, where you don't need a PhD, you just get to come hang out with me. Mwah. This podcast was produced with the support of the incredible Sophie Squires, the wonderful Kate Danger, the fantastic Rich Berner, and the one and only, the best ever made, Serena Reagan. I would like to acknowledge that our podcast is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today.